Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's potentialization. So great to have everyone with us. And just a reminder that this session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, Potentialization YouTube channel, where you can find all of our previous talks as well, if you'd like to look back at everything that we've done, some fascinating talks there. So we're going to have a talk now, and it's going to last about half an hour or so. If you think of any questions while we're having the talk, then please do put them in the chat box, because we're going to open it up to the floor for Q&A after the talk is finished. So this week we have with us John Fisher. So welcome, John.
Thank you, and hello. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, and the talk this week is very, very timely given everything that's happening. So much change happening at the moment. And the title of the talk is The Change Curve and Engagement and Motivation in the Process of Transition. So first of all, John, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background for everyone, please?
Okay, thank you, Phil. My background is quite a varied background. Grew up in the edge of the Yorkshire Dales, a place called Skipton, but then joined the Air Force when I was 16 and worked on aircraft radar, radio systems, laser systems, and then worked on aircraft simulators, then saw the light and moved into project management on the way into moving into a non-job of internal consultancy, training, business partner, coach, etc., etc. Always felt I was a bit of a poster boy for the imposter syndrome, because I realized very quickly electronics did nothing to turn me on at all as part and parcel of it, and did an open university degree in psychology that was the start of this slope into thoroughly loving the last 20 odd years of my life, and it going like a shot. Not that I'm that old, I'm only 31 now.
Of course, yes. So,
oh God, you're a liar so well there.
So fascinating. I tell you what, it's really interesting when you listen to people and the journey that they've been on through their careers, and the changes, and you eventually, a lot of the time, people start doing things, but for some reason it doesn't resonate with them, and then they go on to finding something that they love doing. So it's brilliant to hear that you've found such a thing. So and then talking more about the change curve that is in this. When we're talking about change, what is it that influences our thinking?
Yeah, okay. I'll widen that slightly, if that's okay, in the first instance, then, Phil, just to talk about something that influenced me very heavily within it. When I was doing the Open University, I came across a psychology by a guy called George Kelly that was called Personal Construct Psychology. And when I sort of started reading that, and he talked about effectively we can be the same person in different situations, or we can be different people in the same situation as part of that. And it was all almost relative to where we were, what we were doing, and how we were doing it. And he talked about one of his key sort of concepts was we approach situations based on our past experience and act as if that's true. And that really resonated, and it was almost like a road to Damascus experience. In the scales fell from my eyes, I suddenly found somewhere that fitted with how I saw the world without even realizing it fitted in with anything that was in there. And it's a very person self-centered type of psychology's personal construct theory. I suppose a bit of a giveaway in the name, personal, and it's just about how we see the world, how we map onto the world. I think NLP nicked a lot of Kelly's concepts without giving Kelly the credit that they gave to a few other people, because certainly I can see a lot of similarities between some of the NLP training, and I'm a business practitioner, some of that and some of Kelly's core constructs. And it's about understanding the individual from their point of view. And to be able to communicate well, you need to understand their language. Now, it's also a very personal one, as I say, with it about it. So it's also quite a threat to a lot of people, because it implies that change doesn't happen as an organization. It's the amalgamation of all the individuals changing. And I think it was the guy who used to run the big ICI, Harvey Jones, was it? I think he made the comment, you can change organizations, but it's at one person at a time within it. And that's very much my philosophy. While you can do group work, it's about each person making their own sense of what it is you're doing and understanding it from their own filters, their own worldview. So it's about engagement, and it can be group engagement, but at an individual level. And it's about involving those individuals in what they see from the change, what they think about the change, what they think the change will do for them, and how they think that will sort of happen as part and parcel of it. And it's down at that individual level that we need to have always in our mind. Does that make sense, guys? Thank you.
Does. It does. It does, and it's all about that when we're influenced by our situations and the situation that we're in. We're also influenced by our past experiences, and these are essentially, what you're saying is, these are essentially our beliefs, and our beliefs, past experiences, are things that we think are going to
and I would just change one word there, Phil, maybe, or add another word in. We're influenced by our perception of the situation and our perception of our past experiences, and every subsequent experience adds to that melting pot and then slightly changes the next one. So Kelly used the phrase that we're all scientists. We're constantly creating a hypothesis and testing it out for efficacy, and then changing it or not, as the case may be, within it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because sometimes you don't really think that deeply on what causes your thinking and your influences, but of course it is all the reference points that you have. So could you just explain a little bit more about this change curve, please? Like what it is, and are there different stages, and where do you want to go, just so people can have like a mental model of it as we're talking about it?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing to say, and to own up, it is based around the Kubler-Ross change curve, and came across Kubler-Ross obviously back in the 90s, maybe even late 80s, around on there, and felt its resonance, and it did work, and so used it a little bit, was always recognizing it, but there was always a question mark for me, and working in industry, working within that sort of setting. And I started doing volunteer counselling in the early 1990s as part of this movement, this transformation from being an engineer, project manager, into this type of role within it. So, and as part of that volunteer counselling, I started counselling people with addiction problems, really, mainly alcohol, for Greater Manchester and Lancashire Council for Alcohol Abuse, and started as one of their volunteer counsellors and got trained with them. And I noticed after a while doing the job that lots of people came for a session, an introductory session, built a really good, nice rapport, had a good relationship. They went out on a real high, motivated to go away and start making some major life changes. and then not turning up for the next appointment that they'd made and agreed to. So I went through all the normal paranoia, it's me, I'm rubbish at this, I might as well go home now type of thing, and took a step back and reflected and saw that all of my colleagues, including the really more experienced ones, were having the same situations and problems and were having the same things. So I started reflecting on it and thinking about the implications and what it meant for people within there. Now, it's fair to say that Kelly has been criticised unfairly, in my opinion, but I am biased around not being about motivation and around not really dealing well with emotion within it. I disagree with that because for me, the whole of the concept of the psychology is about motivation. So if you're approaching something based on your past experiences, that's that motivational driver that if it was positive, if it was good, will be higher than if it was negative, if it was bad, that will be lower. So for me, the whole thing is a motivational theory. And Kelly was one of the speakers at the very first Nebraska Symposium on Motivation around going back in the mid-50s within there. And also it was around that emotional journey that we go on as we move through life, as we explore our world map and our world view. So I started thinking about the implications of this and what we were going through, liked the visual concept of Kubler-Ross's change curve. And while I liked the change curve because it made me realize that any change involves loss. You may gain, but you also lose. And it's around how much you win and lose that has that impact on how you approach it and sort of that balance. And for me, Kubler-Ross's stages didn't quite deal with that within it. And while, you know, the bargaining and the rest of it are potentially in there, for me, they're in a slightly earlier element of it. And one of the things that I don't know how much you know about sort of the counselling from that addictive perspective, but one of the things people have to do is make major lifestyle changes around maybe potentially dumping friends, getting a whole new catalogue of friends, changing their social life in massive ways. And I started realising that for me, part of that issue with them not coming back was in the cold light of day when they started thinking about, reflecting about what they had to do. It was a case of the impact on their sense of identity and who they were. And as that grew larger, it had an impact on how they approached that change. So I've kept in the little bit of the Kubler-Ross about that happiness. And I've used some words that have a more common meaning in a slightly different way. But things like the happiness is around something's going to change, that excitement maybe that some people have, that bit of frisson where they think, thank goodness I'm getting fed up with this. But then that goes into a bit of anxiety. So what does it actually mean? Will I be able to cope? And then you link into feelings of threat and feelings of fear within there. And that's about as the size of the impact of the change get larger, then it's more threatening to our sense of self and our sense of identity as part and parcel of that. And as we get down to the bottom of the curve that I originally called depression, but was never comfortable with that word because it didn't fit on two sorts of reasons for me. It didn't quite reflect that emotional place we were at. And also there was that link of clinical depression that wasn't quite appropriate and didn't always fit in with the change as part of the curve. So I eventually sort of settled on confusion. And it's that fog, that not knowing what to do, where to go type of element that you get to. And the sort of stage before that was a stage around guilt. And the reason that's in there is because as people go through this, recognize the size of the impact, the scale and scope of things, they can start being self-critical and start sort of extrapolating that one element that they're just maybe struggling with the change on and mapping it onto their whole life. And it's that one size fits all sometimes that people come in with, where they say, and the stereotyping, where they say, well, if I did that in this area, was I wrong to do it in this area, this area? Does that mean I've been bad? Does that mean I've not been self-aware? And all of this self-doubt and criticism that sort of comes in there that then leads into that. So what do I do? How do I get round it and out of it? And a few years later, because the curve first saw the light of day officially back in 1999. So it's come of age, both in old money of my generation and in new money of that. And showed it at a conference where I was talking about some of my counselling work within it and introduced the curve. And then about 8-9 years ago, I started thinking about anger and where did anger really fit in there, and started exploring how it was located, and realized that at the start of that downward slope, anger tended to be focused out at other people, and we'd blame the other people for making us change when we didn't want to, in whatever way, the organization, the team leader, HR. And as somebody who's worked in HR, you know, I don't mind the stigma within that. And we blame them. But as we go further down and start sort of recognizing some of those implications and impacts, potentially we start getting angry at ourselves, which then leads to the guilt as we take it in. Now, then I've put now more recently, when I changed it to confusion, I added that little flash of insight in whatever way, shape or form that is. For some people, it's coaching, counselling. For some people, because one of the other statements I like with Kelly is we are not the victim of our biography. And if we want to, we can change what we do. We can change how we do it. Not easy, as we all know on here, I'm sure, but we can make that choice to do something different and then experiment and practice with that. And that's where we start playing with it, start looking to see how can I make it work, which bits can I integrate, which do I incorporate, how do I adapt and adjust, to then move on up to making it work. And probably 15 years ago, I got an email from somebody saying, I think there's a stage, John, that links the beginning and the end of this curve that's around complacency. Because I found in my work that when you've gone through the change and you look back, people say, what was I angry at? What was I upset? Why was I worrying? It's all turned out okay. So some of my versions has that in, sometimes it doesn't, if you see what I mean, within it. And I quite like that idea and that thought as well. But what I'd say is this is a fluid, it's that typical, and here's the engineering, apologies, but that typical sine wave that's constantly ongoing without a beginning and the end. And we'll have multiple change curves that's going on in our lives all at the same time. So we'll be on one that's COVID related, we'll be on one that's coming out of or not pandemic related, we'll be the lockdown one, we'll be on one, you guys will be on one on potentialization and your journey through this experience within that, as well as all the rest of them. So we've got these multiples. Again, I suppose, as a child of the 60s, the biorhythms as well within them, that are multiple going on and just going around. So it's that continuous journey, but we can go backwards as well as forwards as part and parcel of this, as some things realise when we're starting to make sense of things, it might then trigger us going back into some of the areas about, so what's the impact of that? How will I manage that and deal with that? And for me, what makes a bit of a strength of this model over Kubler-Ross is I added a couple of exit points, shall we say. So I've got the denial on there, where you just ignore the change, stick your head in the stand up the top end of the curve. And coming off the bottom just before guilt, I've called it hostility from a Kellian perspective. But that's where we expand a lot of energy, proving that the organisation's for stupid for making us change. And we're determined to go use the old system. We're determined to do what we've always done, even though a little bit of us knows that we should be changing, should be doing other things. And then just before that, I added another one in that's effectively sod it, I'm off. And hopefully people physically leave rather than just shut down and go into that freeze mode in a work environment. But for me, this is where people decide that they are not prepared to compromise their values, their belief systems, what they're doing to fit into an organization that they've stopped believing in. And that psychological contract has been destroyed in whatever way, shape or form that is from what's going on. And I know from my personal experience, I've left organisations because I fell out of love with them as part and parcel of that, and I've gone onto somewhere else where I'd be more appreciated, shall we say. So that's the curve in a bit of a nutshell, Phil. And hopefully that makes sense, guys, within it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and you're talking there, and it's essentially all associated to emotion and the emotion that can come around from change. And what's really interesting is if it's a change that you want, you may well not go through any of these, or it could be a change that's forced on you, and then you could go through a lot of them, and you could almost get stuck in certain parts or see some parts of it, but fundamentally it's all about mindset, which is so important. And mindset is 80% of anything that we try and do really to make it a success. But yeah, it's interesting seeing the phases that people go through. And what's really important is, if you are going through a difficult change at work or in life, is to acknowledge these different areas that you're at and understand them and have a process to move on, really.
Definitely.
So yeah, absolutely. So
I think
yeah.
just picking up on that, if I may, Phil, I think that's a fundamentalist part of it, and part of that engagement, allowing people to acknowledge where they are, allowing people to look at where they're at, and then look around them. I have used it many a time where I've physically put a bit of rope string, or even just wrote on flip charts on the floor, and got people in groups or individually to stand where they are. And if I'm working with a group of people, just to have a chat about what it's like to be where they are and how they see it and perceive it. When I've done it individually, I've got them to walk straight across to the other side and do that timelining, looking back and investigating where they are. And part of this comes from what you alluded to. One of the things that I suppose as consultants love is the old Boston box 4-box model. And I just made a little simple one to guide me that's basically around, have I been here before or not? So do I know what to expect? Don't I know what to expect? That's mapped then with the other side is, did it work out well for me? Didn't it work out well for me last time? Going back to that, we replicate our past experience. And then depending on where we lay with that then sort of influences our approach, our action and reaction to that changed situation. And the job we've got as change consultants in some ways for me is around helping people map themselves onto which of those 4 quadrants they are, why they're in that quadrant, and what needs to happen for them to move into a more effective quadrant that then allows them to transit over that curve within it.
Fascinating, fascinating. And talking about all of those kind of things, as you were speaking about this, the closest thing I can relate to this was certainly my fear of public speaking. And a lot of people have a fear of public speaking. Trying to overcome that challenge. I think I went through kind of all of these. And you're right, it's your reference points, it's your anchor points. And I was remembering all the ones that had gone horribly wrong and all of this sort of stuff. And I kind of had to reprogram my mind and learn and train and go through all of this on a public speaking course. But yeah, it's always important to learn and grow.
I suppose from that one, Phil, and I think that's a nice summary, but a nice link as well. One of the other things I did to help me, and most of my thinking comes out of making my life easier and giving me a window to have that coaching conversation or that development conversation with regards to it, is I started thinking about a bit of a model, the past, the present and the future around change. And, read the Cotter stuff about 80% of change fails. I'm not convinced that figure's right on a couple of reasons. But I started thinking about what we need to do is address the past. So we need to close the past down, acknowledge what worked well, acknowledge what it was that was stopping you wanting to do the public speaking about you, acknowledge where that, close that past down after recognizing some of the positives and goods in there as well, and celebrate successes, but close it down to allow us then to create that burning platform to mix metaphors and models. What we then need to do is think about the future. So for Phil, what does effective presentations, effective public speaking look like? What will he be doing? What will he be saying? How potentially will he be dressed? What type of public speaking? What will the audience be? How will they be reacting? What preparation needs to be done to create that really bright, vivid future that's tangible and that you can grab a hold of and grasp? And what you then need to do is look at today. And so Phil alluded to it, going on a public speaking course, getting those, getting that education from there, potentially watching other people and observing good public speakers. So it's creating a route map that gets us from where we are now, that gets us into our future goal. And I'm sure you can see the grow, the slow, the outcomes, all the classic coaching models that we've got there as that structure are within and embedded within that. And if we don't do all three of those, we'll end up with partial change at the best. If you don't close down the past, you'll have people over a coffee and over a chat, over a beer or whatever, really talking about how great the good old days were and how well things went in those days. And I just don't see why we need to change. It was good then. Excuse me. If you don't get that future right, you'll have people almost the headless chicken analogy, running around doing everything without any structure and framework. And one of the things I've done in the past, it doesn't work virtually, sadly, but when I've been in a room talking about this type of concept, I've asked people to close their eyes and point to the east, and then keep pointing there and then open their eyes. And when they open their eyes, everybody's pointing every which way to east. And I talk about without a goal, without knowing where you're going, this is what we end up with. We're all going where we think east is, and some will get there, some won't. And they say, which way's east, John? I say, I haven't a clue. Not really bothered, that's not the point type. And I've had people get on the phone, get their compass up and go, it's that way, John. Thank you. But it's around that. And if we don't create that vision that's smart, effectively, or that we know when we've achieved it, then we end up with people feeling they're on a treadmill, feeling they're constantly moving, everything's going, but they just don't know when that end will be. And they feel it's drudgery, it's the hamster, really, symbol. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it's really great because I had the personal motivation, if you like, to overcome fear, because it's always good to challenge yourself, and it's always good to learn and grow. and so and change is required for that, stretching yourself out of your comfort zone. And one question I'd love to ask is, let's say there are people that are at work, and obviously there's a lot of change with COVID, people either working remotely or going back into the, all sorts of stuff is happening. And let's say they're trying to work through some kind of change or transition at work, and how do they then, have you got any tips and techniques for getting that engagement and getting the motivation out of the people who might not necessarily all be in alignment with this transition that's required?
Yeah.
You know, knowing that they may well be going through this emotional curve. How can people use this practically for a collective that might not all be aligned?
Definitely. There is an apologies just right answer, because there is no easy answer to that. My way has been really focus groups, has been engaging the teams, having those discussions, getting the team away days, engaging them in creating that vision of the future. So explaining why we need to change, looking at what we need to change and some of those elements of it. And then getting them to say, okay, what can it be like? How can we improve it? How can we make it better? And trying to get them to own part of that change and being that change. And that works on a couple of levels for me. Part of it is it gets their engagement, commitment and buy-in to that change. Another part is it might bring up things I'd not thought about, or the organisation had not thought about, that then allows us to have those sensible discussions about, is this bit right, should we adapt this bit, or we need to include it in where we're going. And it also allows me to kill off the past, or to get through those areas that people think that are not practicable and not appropriate, and help them see that maybe that isn't the best way in whatever way it is. Now, I'm also extremely pragmatic, and sometimes you have to agree to disagree around on there. And part of that is the number or the size and the scale of that discontent within it, and that will then dictate, really, has the organisation got it right? Does it need to rethink if they've got too much because something's been missed along the way? Part of that process and steps have been missed. Trained in Kotter's or Holgan, whatever his name is, iceberg theory that's based on Kotter's. So I use things like that. I use a variation of force field analysis that I've used within teams before, that I love as a resistance to change model, that a guy called Finn Schude came up with back in the 60s, and he called it the ABC model. For no apparent reason that I can work out, apart from its 3 steps and the first 3 letters of the alphabet are ABC. That appears to be the limit of the creativity in the title. And what that is where are we now? Where do we want to be within that? And that's the sort of first brainstorm that, get those identified, written down. The next step is look at the negatives of where we are now and the positives of where we're going to and where we want to be. So that's around really the change. That's about the drive for change, the need for change. What are we doing? What Finn then did, which for me makes this really powerful, is he then said, okay, let's turn it on our head. What's good about where we are now? What's the positives about where we are now? And what's the negatives? What will we lose in the future as part and parcel of that? And I've had teams brainstorming that on flip charts, on papers. I've had individuals doing that. I've got hundreds of them, copies of their flip charts and their papers in my files. I've got them then to score them a little bit, sometimes to score, sometimes they didn't need to. Because for me, if that third line is more strong, is more powerful than the argument for change, people just won't change. And so that bottom line gives you an indication of an idea. where to focus attention on as a change agent. So by getting them to score, and I'm a fan of solution focus and that scaling questions within it and give them scores, it allows them to visually see what are the more important, where maybe are the almost non-negotiables that you've got to identify a workaround for, that then allows that commitment and engagement for people to help make it work, because they own it then. Now, I appreciate that's really easy for me to say up here in the Northwest, and when you're down in front of people who are angry. And I have to say, I've worked with a lot of shop floor guys on change and getting them through change. One of my first roles as an internal consultant was literally working with people who hammered bits of metal into shape to go onto aeroplanes, amongst other things, and part and parcel. I've worked and done these sort of things with people who dig holes in the ground for your gas, electric and water supplies, etc. And it's worked just as well. I've had to do things slightly differently, just because of the population, but it's worked just as well in helping them engage with that change. So, and for me, it's part of helping them see the need or the reason for change.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Phil?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So essentially, you're saying that it's about aligning the change with people's values, understanding what their values are, understanding how that relates to the change, and that will understand what emotions are triggered. But if it's way off, so if it's completely out of balance with their values, perhaps the organisation may have done something that needs to be reassessed, or perhaps there's something more fundamental that needs to be reassessed. But it's about getting, the buy-in of the values, and then you can support them through that change and the emotions, etc.
The change could be square peg in round hole change. So, okay, this is where we're going as an organisation. You don't want to go there. Where do you want to go? How do you want to work? And look at where we can move them into a job that gives them satisfaction and gives them pleasure, and keep them in the company if we can, or not if we can't.
It's so important people are happy doing what they're doing, because that's when they deliver the best service, that's when they're most creative, that's when the organisation can get the most out of them. And obviously, like, we spend so many hours at work, so it's important to be happy. So absolutely supporting people through this process and understanding if any changes need to be made is fundamental.
Well, and for me, that's where you've got to understand where they're coming from to be able to engage effectively with them is so powerful, because it puts me as a learner. So you tell me, so what does this mean for you? How do you do that? Rather than going in as many other philosophies do and say, this is the answer. Might be your answer, but I'm not you, I'm me. And part of why I love it.
Wonderful, because you're right, it's so important to listen. And there's no one size fits all. Every organisation is different. Every person's different, and so it's a complex thing. Do you know, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, John. Really fascinating.
Thank you.
Is hand over to the other John. If there's any questions coming in, or if anybody's got any questions they would like to ask John.
Well, I'm watching so far. The only one I can see is somebody was asking about boogieing earlier on. If I can.
Yeah, Julie was boogieing away to your music, John. It's super. And Jane was jealous, so I said Jane could boogie too.
So while we wait for any questions, or if anybody wants to come in, I really resonate with this stuff, because the reason I got involved in any of this stuff was discovering spiral dynamics 20 years ago, which is a stage development model. And for me, as people move through those changes, these are massive internal value system changes. And a couple of things I remember from two different things. One is, I ran a group 25 years ago with somebody on the Celestine prophecy. And it was people exploring new ideas and values. And I felt guilty at one point, because several people that came to the group, their relationships broke up. But I realized afterwards that was because their values had changed, and perhaps somebody in the background hadn't. And the other thing that's very similar is, I've seen people in politics change party, and nastiness from one side, this is a total betrayal of your values, to the other side, obviously welcome them in. They're major change processes that people are going through. So I don't know if you want to talk about any of those kind of things while we wait for other people, if they've got any questions.
Yeah, I will, and then I'm going to ask Julie a question in a minute, if I may, just to pre-warn her. I think what you're talking about in many ways was one of the most powerful elements of educating Rita. Regarding that film, and of course being an Open University student whose marriage did survive my Open University and has continued onwards, you know, that's that growing apart thing and that drifting, and that really just reinforced my thoughts, my perceptions within what we're doing and what we were saying. And the question for Julie, if I may, Julie, was around what I was saying just towards the end there about understanding their perspective, understanding it from their point of view and engaging, appeared to me to resonate nicely with you as well around. So what are your thoughts on that? And you are on mute, by the way.
Okay, cool. Well, you were reminding me of a couple of consultancy projects I had right at the beginning, sort of like probably 20 years ago. And in a sense, because I was, well, I think I would still do it this way, but I was very much learning. The thing that resonated with me is you're asking the people what it means to them and what they would do, and it's different for everyone. And that getting those conversations into the room is just so important, really. It's so important. And for it to be okay for someone just to say, you know, I hate this. And in fact, one consultancy brought me in where they'd been trying to do a change thing by going straight in with how wonderful this change is, and let's have balloons and everything. And they were doing it in the Northeast, big manufacturing company. And they just all walked out the room, more or less, either physically or in their heads, and they swore at the trainers and everything. So they got in contact with me because I'm a psychologist at that time and just said, do you think you could help us? We're not sure why our usual ebullient training is not working. And I said, well, it's because it's changed. So they just thought they could teach people the way to be in the future without dealing with that this is an insult to us. You've made redundant some of our friends, and when we let them just do a thing of how they were feeling, hate came up. All kinds of very strong emotions came up.
Very much so.
And it just, all of that had to happen before they said, okay, tell us what it's about.
And if you don't get that out in the emotion, it'll never happen. It'll fester and become even worse. For me, I think the best example of that I've ever seen is David Brent. I've got good news and I've got bad news. You're all made redundant. I've got a promotion. I just love that. I just love that. That's just so, and that's just exactly what you're saying for me, Julie.
We did have some people cry. And in fact, that was really important because that's a step away from hate. And a step towards that this
catharsis.
And so agree. The other consultants from that consultancy, where they were kind of high energy trainers, they learned so much about this is a whole different arena when you're dealing with change. Particularly redundancy. You know, they had to talk about they still knew that some of their friends had been made redundant, and it was all new to Britain at that time. This was
20 years ago when you were doing this in the Northeast, the scar of the mines in the 80s, it's only 16 years before, will have still been really strong. I worked out of Sheffield 10 years ago, and the Yorkshire pits were still back in the 80s with some people, and there were people there who 30 years later were still being ostracized within it as part. So really, and that's part of why for me the past is so important, Julie, around on there, because you've got to recognize what happened to their communities that were devastated within that, and people will think that's going to happen to them because that's how some people think.
They're worried about each other's children, and they're worried about each other's rent or mortgage, and there was a lot to worry about.
Yeah, and rightly so.
And so it took more or less an extra day before it was like, well, tell us what the idea is. But then it wasn't. This was the last bit you said. It wasn't tell us. It was like more like get to the vision and then say how can you see this working? Yeah. And so then they're starting coming in with ideas. So
Definitely.
it's and that's the co-creation work that I heard you saying in your questions, where again sometimes the managers think they just have to design it all and tell people what to do, and it's good if they've got their ideas as well, and very often they're very similar. Yeah. But it makes a world of difference that we've asked them and they've come up with their ideas.
Totally.
And say, oh, your ideas weren't so stupid after all, and they come together.
People feel a sense of ownership then, and it's fair to say, like you, Julie, I'm a psychologist within there.
Steve, do you want to come off mute and ask yourself, or do you want me to read it for you?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, John, thanks very much for that. And I have my own models, but that's by the by, but I associate with everything you're saying. But I'm interested in your thoughts on how companies and organisations might approach training and development in the new normal. Do you think that they're likely to, maybe that's the wrong term I used, embrace it more so, or just do even less than they do now, and just hope that things sort of trundle along on an even path? What do you think?
I think loads of things there, Steve. That's a real poison chalice. That's a hospital pass you've given me there, Steve. That one. I think loads of things. I think we'll never go back to full face-to-face, 2 days, 3 days a week away. I think companies have realised how much cheaper it is to convert a one-day course into a 2-hour session or into 3 2-hour sessions over a period of time. The cost savings on hotels, on transport, on everything else are a lot more. So I think we'll never go to that personally. No insights apart from just my gut feelings within that. I think we'll go back to a blended, because I think there's still the avenue, the need for that human connection that we've got as part of that. I think there's a need for more in-house coaching by organisations to help their people make those transitions between 100% in the office, 100% out of the office, some form of amalgamation of the two, between the two. And I did some work with a major financial company over the last 3 or 4 years within it, and their call centre people who all got sent home in the middle of a massive reorganisation where the leadership went down by 40%. As part of that, I was part of a team that did a bit of coaching support for some of these guys to help them come to terms with it. I think there's the same need for people going back, because they've got used to living rooms, they've got, well, back bedroom I've converted, they've got used to families round and everything else, and they've got used to just going down to the library for an hour in the middle of the day and doing things. So I think there's a need for that. I also saw this company immediately stop face-to-face training and then suddenly start up virtual training, Zoom training. And what they did that I thought really worked well was they created, and we were just talking earlier, Phil, John and I, around this. What they did was they had the facilitator who was doing the speaking, and then they had the admin who was the real heart of it. I'm saying that because John's obviously here doing that, who did that and managed the slides, managed the breakout rooms, could act as well with some of the facilitators who were a bit more forward thinking, add a second voice into what was happening, and manage some of the annotation type exercises as well within that. And that for me worked really, really well within it and just gave that little bit of extra. what I saw work really, really badly with some people, because I did the administrative slot as well as the facilitator role, I was lucky, is people approached the virtual sessions as if they were face-to-face sessions and tried to operate in the same way. One guy, I watched him half a dozen times, and I'll never get those 7 or 8 hours of my life back. And at my age, I can't afford to lose them. And he started off by saying, I'm from so-and-so and I don't do boring. And after the first session, an hour and a half, I thought, yes, you do, within it. And he just tried to act as if he was face to face, rather than engaging people, bringing people in, talking to people. And he just talked at them, and he spent the hour and a half talking at people on it, and every time he did it, he did that. So no engagement, no communication, no talking around, no rhetorical question asking, no bringing people in and inviting them to talk within it. So I think there's something that needs to be done to almost train the trainer. Now, don't get me wrong, I saw some superb trainers who'd really got that and understood really well that you have to operate in a different way for it to be successful within it. So I think there's a balance of things that need to happen. And I think the trainers who don't adapt just won't get reused. The trainers who do adapt will enhance their reputation significantly within it, and I do think there's a place for both.
And do you see, John, that the majority of companies and organisations will develop their own in-house resource for this, or do you see them going externally, how it was maybe more so a number of years ago?
Yeah, and this is based on nothing but my personal experience within it, I think they'll go externally. Within that one. If I think about the company I was working for that was supporting this major financial institution, they've made probably of the in-house team that they had delivering the training, etc. I think it was about 16, 2 months before the first lockdown last March. At the back end of last year, it was down at 4 within that, and the subcontract that they had escalated like topsy. But what that also meant was that whereas they'd been using subcontractors almost weekly, suddenly they ended up with using subcontractors once or twice a year, and they lost a few off their list as a result of that. I'm now supporting a company that's basically been brought in to teach coaching, to teach the in-house people how to coach within there. And I'm part of that internal coaching, giving them the support in that amongst other things. And I think that's where companies may go in-house, based on a really small sample, Steve, got to be honest, on both instances. But that's just the impression I get from the way the wind's blowing. We might see an increase on coaching skill support, as we see more of an outsourcing of the training department and training teams. What's your thoughts on that then, Steve?
No, I'm inclined to agree with you, John. And as much as, I mean, I'm a coach myself, but as much as I love the idea of companies and organisations having more of a coaching culture, you know, I remember back in the last recession when everything flipped, and it was and now we're now gonna train and coach everyone to become coaches, and it all got in vogue. But as soon as the going got tougher, you know, it all changed again.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked the question, because I think we're in totally uncharted territory.
Well, I think there's a lot of work to be done with organisations around what does coaching mean, and around organisational culture within it. A friend of mine, she was called into a company that were looking to deploy a coaching culture in the company. She was interviewing various key stakeholders as part of her prep, and she talked to one senior manager, and they said, "Oh yeah, I'll give you an example of my coaching. I called somebody in for coaching last week and sacked them." So she walked away from that contract because that was an even bigger hospital pass than the one you gave me, Steve. Within there. So, and I think there's still, and this financial organisation that I was engaged with, and other ones I'm hearing stories about, have people called coaches that are actually feedback givers, observers. So they listen to, let's say, a call centre. These people are called coaches. They listen to the call and they then give feedback on that call. And there's no coaching engaged at all within it. And I'm hearing more companies that are like that at this moment in time.
That's scary.
Yeah, totally. And others, where they've got people who are in, let's say, project management. So I'm hearing about lots of people who are called agile coaches, within there that are doing that. And I think while that's positive in that instance, and I don't mind the giving of feedback and think that's positive, I think when you call it coaching, it sends the wrong message that will take a long time to overcome.
Yeah, interesting.
Fascinating.
We haven't actually got very long left, have we, Phil? But I wonder if John's got any comments. I think artificial intelligence is going to disrupt lots of jobs. What should the country be doing to be ready for that?
Shooting the IT people.
Sorry?
Shooting the IT people.
Yeah.
Make it look like an accident, John. That's a difficult one, because if I go back to my undergraduate, my OU degree, there were some semi-sophisticated bots that were there that were doing that coaching type of, could respond and pick up on key words. And I heard a year or two ago something that scared me silly. It's not difficult, but there's now a robot that can tick the box on forms that says, "I am not a robot." I know, Julie, that's just that nightmare material, isn't it? George Orwell, eat your heart out. I think it can take some places of some of the rote. I don't think, and I don't think I don't think solo type of virtual learning is effective either for people like me, who like to be able to talk and chat about it and have a laugh and a joke. I think there's a place for it, and I think some of that computer-based training, to use an old expression, will come in where you've got to sheep dip. I hope in my lifetime we never get where all training's done by a machine.
I'm sure there'll be hopefully plenty that are still done by real people. And what's interesting is with AI is, yes, it's absolutely got advantages of using technology in the right places, but people are obviously so important still, and that interaction and communication. And one thing that it doesn't matter kind of what level of the AI it is, or any technological advance, is exactly what we've been talking about here, which is a good point to kind of wrap up on, is the fact that AI just doesn't do emotion. It's very functional. It's a given input, set of probabilities and an output. And so, yeah, it's still got a long way to go to really cover human emotions and everything that's covered in the mind. So yeah, fascinating. Well, that was really, really wonderful. Thank you so much, John. And how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to chat to you more?
John at c2d.co.uk. The letter C, the number 2, the letter D, .co.uk. My website, c2d.co.uk. Drop me an email. Get on my website, LinkedIn. I think it might be John M. Fisher on LinkedIn. Within that one,
great.
Within there, so loads of ways.
Can you please say your email again?
Certainly, John.
Upper or lowercase?
All lowercase, and there's a H in it. It's the real John.
Not the trendy John. Yeah.
Oh,
John,
oh.
is that John Fisher?
No, it's just John at
John
c2d.co.uk.
C number 2 D letter.
Yep. .co.uk.
.co.uk.
It's,
So c2d.co.uk. Right, lovely, thank you.
Wonderful, great. So thank you very much, everybody.
Sorry, Phil, I've just
sorry.
put my phone number and my email address in chat.
Yeah, great. Okay, so wonderful. So people have got it there. Excellent.
And like Bob Hoskins says, I'm happy to talk. It's good to talk.
Always good to talk. Always good to talk. Thank you so much, John. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I hope everybody's found it really insightful. And we look forward to seeing you next week at the next potentialization interview. So thank you very much and good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. It's been fun as well. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful.